Hey, wow. Don't you people ever go to sleep?
We love rock fever! Yeah!
We're New Englanders. Yeah, a region of the country that still has roots, traditions, town meetings, and they still know how to fight Walmart, don't they? Well, I was just asked, why did I end the campaign in Maine? And what I told the television reporter, I said, well, the main issue in this campaign is the shift of power from the giant corporations to the people of this country. If that's the main issue, why not end the campaign in Maine? But Maine also led the way with campaign finance reform with that referendum that you won 2 years ago. And then Vermont caught the spirit, didn't they? Now Missouri and Oregon are doing it. So the states are leading, but remember, it only happens because the people have the right to vote directly. That reform into law. And our forebears, they knew that when the legislature, the governors are in hock or they're owned by the corporate or special interest, you got to give people that residual right to replace the legislature, in effect, and put a proposal on the ballot and then vote it into law. See, that's the strength of democracy. That's called direct democracy when representative democracy fails. And we need more of that. I got to take a break now and talk about the drummers here. We talk all over the country about the drummers in Maine when we come to play. But I taught them the Roman Legion drum beat, and they still can't get it right.
Can you do it?
So here it is. Let me give it to them. Okay, let's hear it.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3.
Not quite. Here's the way it goes. Here's the way it goes. It goes like this. Boom, 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 boom. It's the drumbeat of determination, the drumbeat of relentless focus on the objective, which is to build a strong and deep democracy so that that great instrument we call democracy can be unleashed to solve our systemic problems and to prevent injustices that course throughout this country, even in a time of booming economy, where the majority of the workers are making less in real dollars than they made 25 years ago, where 1/3 of every full-time worker can't earn a living wage, which is at least $10 an hour. They're earning $5, $15, $6, $7, $8, where everybody should have universal health insurance coverage. It's where we establish our country on a national mission to abolish poverty, especially the curse of child poverty. 20% of the children in this country growing up in deep poverty, 34% in District of Columbia, 25% in California. There are countries in the Western Europe after the rubble of World War II. Just think what they did. Because they built in that period of time a deeper and more representative democracy, and they had stronger trade unions, and they had social democratic parties. In the 1950s, 1960s, they gave their people, as a matter of law, all of them, what we don't have today in the year 2000, the richest country in the world. They gave them universal health insurance coverage, full paid maternity leave, full paid sick leave, 1 month paid vacation, good public transit for people to get around without a car, and facilities to form trade unions much easier than our workers have to build their standard of living and working conditions at an even higher level. Why don't we have this in our country? Why don't we have these simple necessities of life? Because we have allowed, by our default as citizens, we have allowed corporations to say no to us and get away with it. And what we have to understand is every time in our history, when corporations or the business establishment said no to drives for justice, and every time they lost, America was better. And let me just run it through. In 1776, the principal business establishment, apart from a few dissidents, were against cutting loose from King George III. They lost, and America was better. In the drive against slavery, it was the cotton plantations and the main business establishments that said no to the abolitionists against the greatest curse that ever flowed through the North American continent, in addition to the genocide of the Indian tribes. And the cotton plantations lost, and America was better for it. And it was the industrial companies in the liquor industry that were against the women's right to vote, because women were organizing against child labor. They wanted to abolish it, let the children go to school, and let adults take those jobs. And the business establishment lost, and America was better as a result. And when the Industrial Revolution began to expand, and the workers were brutalized in the mines and foundries and factories, and they drove to form trade unions, the business establishment said no, and they lost, and America was better as a result. And then came the farmers roaring out of East Texas against the giant banks who were squeezing them with high interest rates for their loans, and the railroads that were squeezing them with high freight rates to get their crops to market. And they roared out, and 200,000 of them were organized in just 6 months in 6 East Texas counties. $1 due per farmer, $50 today. And they roared across the country in the greatest populist progressive reform movement in our history. And the banks and railroads lost, and America was better for it, and the farmers survived as independent farmers in the rural economy. And in our 20th century, same thing, isn't it? The environmental movement against the business establishment. No, the business establishment said, we're not going to have any laws passed that would clean the air and clean the water and reduce the toxics in the workplace. And they lost some of that battle, and America was better off. And the same with the civil rights movement. People wanted the right to go in a restaurant and eat, drink water from a fountain, and quench their thirst, whether they were black or white. And the business establishment told them, no, white only. And they took it to the Supreme Court, and the business establishments lost. And they lost in the discriminatory way. They paid black people less money for equal work, and America was better for it. And the same with the consumer movement. When I went to Washington in 1964, and I took on the auto companies, people told me, the auto companies are all powerful. The biggest, most powerful company is General Motors. You'll never get them to build safer cars required by law. You'll never get them under federal regulation. And we built a movement with the evidence and went up on Capitol Hill, and guess what? We had people who listened to us in those days. You know who they were? They called themselves Democrats. They listened to us, and they passed those bills in 1966. And guess what? There was someone in the White House that was willing to stand up to the big, powerful auto companies. His name was Lyndon Johnson, and he signed that. And during that 6-month struggle, 1966, the press reported it as a regular beat. It wasn't an occasional feature. It was day after day. And with those 3 assets, which we all deserve, don't we? When we go to Washington, those 3 assets established laws that drove the death rate on American highways from 5.6 fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles to last year 1.6, saving millions of lives and injuries in the process. That's what happens when they're responsible. And we can't do that anymore. That's the essential point, that the two parties have morphed into one corporate party on issue after issue. And the similarities in their betrayal of Americans and our democracy for a pile of campaign cash from corporate interests who pay them off with equal opportunity recipient strategy. They pay the same industries pay off both parties. The extravagant fundraising dinners, the pharmaceutical, oil, the big banks, the insurance companies, the HMOs, they just go to one dinner, and they wipe their mouth with a napkin, go across the street, go to another dinner. One is Republican, one is Democrat. The similarities between the two parties now tower over the dwindling differences. And I say dwindling because many of the differences that you may perceive by watching this election campaign are purely rhetorical. They don't really mean what they're saying. And some of the differences are just popping off, that's all. Oh, you're going to do this with the surplus, and you're going to do that. When till you look back at that in a year or two? And, you know, the real government in Washington is the corporate government. Al Gore and George Bush don't matter very much. When they go into the White House, whichever one goes to the White House, they're just taking the marching orders from their corporate paymasters. That's what 22,000 daily corporate lobbyists get done, swarming the city, swarming our national capital. That's what 9,000 political action committees do. They write checks. They buy and rent politicians. Capitol Hill has become Wuthering Heights. That's what we call it. A very shaky establishment. Indeed, the White House has become a corporate prison. When we look at what this country could be like, not just catching up with Western Europe, when we look at how we can be the leader in transforming energy technology in the world from the ozone depleting, global warming, acid rain, fossil fuels, and the deadly radioactive waste that cannot find a repository that's safe for 200,000 years, shifting that to solar energy, renewable energy across the world. We think how we can reassert our sovereignty and withdraw from those pernicious autocratic systems of governance that subordinate our best health and safety standards to the dictates of international commerce and pull standards down all over the world, called the World Trade Organization and NAFTA. We can get out of those and establish trade agreements, environmental agreements, labor agreements, consumer agreements to lift the standards up. We can lead the world in waging peace instead of spending all our resources preparing for war against no known major enemy. It was Douglas MacArthur who said it first in 1957 about our government exaggerating foreign threats in order to expand the military budget. 3 years later, Dwight Eisenhower warned us about the encroachment of the military-industrial complex led by the weapons manufacturers today, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing. We can have a world where we lead in peace and we redefine national security as preserving and protecting the degrading world environment, as helping to eradicate poverty, as having a major assault on global infectious diseases, on for once having a foreign policy that instead of constantly supporting dictatorships and oligarchs, supports democratic forces by the workers and the peasants. We can have a country where the taxation is progressive, where companies cannot escape through shelters and loopholes. A country where we get the corporations and the rich off welfare and save those hundreds of billions of dollars. Save those hundreds of billions of dollars and bring them back home for the schools and the clinics and the drinking water systems and the libraries and the public transit and the universal health care. Intel Corporation, New York Stock Exchange, the gambling casinos, the drug companies, the agribusiness giants, they're supposed to be capitalists. They're proud to be capitalists. And if they're capitalists, let them sink or swim on their own. They don't have to be bolstered. You have a country where families can send one person to work, and that person can come back with a middle-class standard of living, so other things more important in life can be dealt with by other people. We're sliding behind most people. Do you know in this boom, majority of the workers making less today in real purchasing power than 25 years ago? Do you know the minimum wage today in real purchasing power at $5.15 is $2.15 less than what it was in 1968, adjusted for inflation? I mean, when the economy doubles in 32 years, as it did, in output per capita, when it goes up 65% in productivity, the minimum wage should be double what it was in 1968. We'd have a country where there would no longer be a failed war on drugs. It would treat drug addicts as health problems for rehabilitation, not as criminals to go to jail. Where did we get this medieval superstition anyway? We don't send alcoholics to jail. We don't send nicotine addicts to jail. Why do we send drug addicts to jail? To fill the corporate prisons and increase the stock options and the stock prices of these conglomerate prison industries? We want safety in the community. The failed drug war takes that away. Communities are imperiled. The police are imperiled. The drug addicts are not subject to rehabilitation. The Rand Institute has proved, as many other studies, it's far more efficient, far more humane, far more effective to shift our dollars in the drug war into rehabilitation, community policing, and not sending more money to Colombia, South America, and other militarizations of the drug war. Our country should not be an instrument for global criminality. And one of the chief instruments of our country's global criminality, and we've dragged the UN into this, is to continue the 10 years of brutal economic sanctions against the children and innocent people of Iraq. 5,000 children a month are dying, according to the United Nations' own study. What about corporate crime, fraud, and abuse? Here's the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, 60 Minutes, magazines exposing corporate crime, fraud, and abuse. You've seen it. HMO crimes against patients, the looting of investors, the criminal activities by banks and insurance companies like Metropolitan, Prudential were caught red-handed finally. We just put out 100 pages on our website, votenader.com, excerpting articles from newspapers, magazines all over the country, the press's finest hour, exposing one corporate crime, fraud, and abuse, the drug companies, one corporate crime, fraud, and abuse after another, and nothing happens. There's no action by the government, no regulatory action, no congressional hearings, nothing, no prosecutions. Shows you we have a collapsing democracy. As these companies get more and more powerful, reminds me of something Woodrow Wilson said, well, almost a century ago, when he said, there is a growing power in America that is becoming more powerful than the United States government. He was talking about the new giant trusts, as they were called, the Timber Trust, and J.P. Morgan's financial powerhouse, and the steel companies, etc. But we have now fewer and fewer giant corporations that are collapsing our democracy. These giant corporations have been on a collision course with American democracy, and American democracy is losing. And you know what happens when American democracy loses? You lose, big time. You're losing control, and you know it. You don't want to admit it. Some of you are too proud. You're losing control over everything that matters in your life. You're losing control over your government. You're losing control over your schools, your children. You're losing control over the food you eat and don't know what's in it. You're losing control over your right to choose your own doctor and hospital, deprived by the HMOs. You're losing control over your right to go to court, to have your full day in court against companies that injure you wrongfully because of their defective products. You're losing control over your own human genes as the genetic engineering corporations are trying to transform the genetic inheritance of our planet into their own monopoly patent rights, that they're taking the genetic inheritance of humans, flora and fauna. Can you imagine a more brazen industry without any regulation whatsoever? The toy industry is regulated in Washington, but not the biotechnology industry. And there's no framework. And you're losing control over your personal privacies. Do you ever think you'd see the day when corporations knew more about you than you know about yourself? Because you can't keep it all in your mind. What you bought, what you didn't buy, what you get in the mail, what your financial credit record is, how many checks bounced. Your name may go into a computer box. Basically, you can't get a checking account. That's the latest shenanigan of the banks. They blacklist you. They'll know your genetic profile. They'll figure out which jobs they're going to offer you and which they're not. Pretty soon, all this financial data, your medical, your credit card, your shopping habits, what programs you listen to, the surveillance is incredible. The latest one is they're going to find out when you're in a moving car commuting, what program you're listening to on your radio, and then put it in that computer database. They're giving you a credit score number. Now they're stratifying you, and if you call up for some shopping to a bank, they say, well, that customer is not very valuable. We'll put an automatic robot voice on, and we won't respond. And after a while, you see, you've lost your freedom. That's why there's a constitutional right for privacy. They're taking it away from you. You may wonder, where is this information? It's in a database. It's whirling around the world. You have no control over it. You can't correct it. You can't stop the use of it. No tyranny in the world has had more information about its subjects than these global corporations and their data mining relentlessly. And that's just the beginning. When people have information about you that you can't control, they control you. And those people are corporations. Let me just look at tomorrow now for a moment. After this election tomorrow, and I know you're all going to go out and get 100 votes each, right? You know, see, if all of you get 100 votes each, we'll take Portland. All right. Just think what we've accomplished in 8 months. with spending less than 1% of what the other parties have spent, getting less than 1% of the national TV media, up against the entrenched parties who control the statutory barriers to access, to even get on the ballot. In some states, it's horrendously high, tens of thousands of signatures in North Carolina. They control the money. They control the command of the media. They get most of the media. They command the crooked company called the Debate Commission to exclude significant third parties. And each of them controls about 30% of the vote because they're hereditary Democrats and hereditary Republicans. You know, they'll vote for whoever is at the ticket just because they're grandparents. You know, they're hereditary. Now imagine challenging that. It was so much fun. That's why we call our campaign the campaign of joy and justice. That's why we like Cicero's definition of freedom, which is participation in power. And that's why we like Daniel Webster's definition of justice as the great work of human beings on earth. So we have an uphill fight, right? So 8 months with your help, the help of students on campuses and universities, the help of our volunteers, our canvassers, our organizers, that get out to vote. In 8 months, here's what we're going to have on Wednesday. We are going to have these politicians in Washington squirming like you can't believe. We'll have the millions of votes necessary to make us the third largest party by far in the United States, replacing the Reform Party. And second, we will be immediately the watchdog party, holding those two parties' feet to the fire and telling them if they don't shape up, they're on their way out in future elections. Thirdly, we have hundreds of thousands of people coming into progressive politics. That is a tremendous asset, especially getting the young back. You know, the young often say to me, I'm not turned on politics. And I say to them, listen, read your history. Everywhere in the world where people didn't turn on politics, and you know, politics was originally conceived centuries ago as the antidote to tyranny. It was the answer. Look at the origin of the word. I say to those young people, if you're not turned on to politics, you know what's going to happen? Down to the air you breathe, the water you drink, the racial profiling you detest, the health insurance your families don't have. If you don't turn on politics, politics will turn on you. And the rallies on the universities are tremendous all over. We have 1,000 coordinators on 800 campuses. We have full-time organizers all over the country. We've campaigned from Hawaii to Maine and from Alaska to Florida. As a matter of fact, I'm the only presidential candidate to go to Alaska, which might explain why we're 17%. Our polls are beginning to surge, and you know, they don't poll new voters or voters who dropped out and are coming back in for us. What's interesting, the Democrats, for 6 months, when asked by the reporters, what do you think of the Nader LeDuc candidacy? The representatives of the Democratic Party and Al Gore had one answer: we're not losing any sleep over it. To which I would always reply, slumber on, Al Gore, slumber on. For months, Al Gore could never mention my name. 2 weeks ago, he engaged in a real verbal breakthrough. He referred to me as him. When he said, I'll match my environmental record against anyone, including him. So I wrote him an open letter inviting him to a public discussion so we could indeed match our environmental record. He wasn't even around when I was on the front line spearheading the move for the Air and Water Pollution Control Acts of the early 70s, or going to California and helping people break the grip of the auto companies that smothered that southern area of California with smog. He wasn't even around then, but let's give him his credit. Let's see how it matches up. Who's been fighting against nuclear power? It's me. It's not Al Gore, who supports taxpayer subsidies for nuclear power, as well as oil, gas, trucking. While Al Gore has surrendered to the biotechnology industry and the pesticide industry, taken a dive on never making a major statement behind organic farming and the preservation of the small farm in America. Up there. While he was voting for those two anti-environmental justices of the Supreme Court, he supported and voted for Scalia, and he did not object to Clarence Thomas. It was the Democratic Party that sent Scalia and Thomas to the Supreme Court. They could have stopped them cold. Instead, Scalia was voted in 98-0, including Al Gore, every senator. I couldn't get one Democratic senator in working opposition to break ranks. And the Democrats, with George Mitchell as the majority leader in the U.S. Senate, 11 Democrats went over and gave Clarence Thomas the 52-48 confirmation victory. Where was Al Gore then? Huh? Where was Al Gore when we were fighting the WTO and NAFTA, which was terribly anti-environmental, and he was pushing it through, both of them, with Clinton and Gore and their corporate buddies. Listen, when it comes to corporate power, the only difference between Al Gore and George W. Bush is the velocity with which their knees hit the floor when corporations knock on their door. The issue in this campaign is corporate power and how we can take it away from them and give it back to the American people as voters, workers, taxpayers, and consumers. And Business Week magazine, the mainstream magazine, on full-page ads, you know, GE, GM, Boeing, Toyota, that's where they get their money. Look how courageous they were. September 11th issue. They answered this question, too much corporate power, with page after page of devastating detail on corporate abuses, with the answer, yes, there is too much corporate power. And then they polled the American people. 72% of the American people said there's too much power over all aspects of their life. You don't have to tell them. They know. And then the editorial, Business Week made an interesting distinction. You know, corporations aren't real people. They're artificial entities. They're not flesh and blood people. And then they made an interesting distinction. And they basically said this exact words in their editorial: corporations should get out of politics, end quote. Here it is. Can you imagine how decayed the Republican Democratic parties when Business Week magazine is to the left of the Democratic Party? So the key now is to get out the vote. So let's hear some motivational responses here. How many people are going to vote tomorrow? I'll assume they're a green vote? Yeah. people in this audience I know who are lesser of the two evil people. They're thinking about the least of the worst. They're settling for less. They're allowing their expectation level to be reduced. Once again, when you vote for the least of the worst between the Republicans and Democrats, you know what happens? They both get worse every 4 years. We've been waiting a long time. We gave them 1980, and we gave them 84, and we gave them 88, and we gave them 92, and we gave them 96, and pretty soon both parties were blurred as they began to morph into one another, a big corporate party. How many more years are we going to give them? The Democrats are now saying, why are you doing it this time? And you know what Phil Donahue answered when he was asked? He said, what do we do? Do we wait another 4 years and then ask the two parties, can we do it now? A few hours ago, Al Gore really got desperate. He finally mentioned me by name. He said, listen to this forked tongue. Listen to this. He said, the chemical industry and the oil industry want to defeat me, he said. Why would they want to defeat him? He's given them everything they wanted. They want to defeat me. And he said, the way they can defeat me is for you voters to vote for George W. Bush and he hesitated. I heard it on TV. And for Ralph Nader. Can you imagine? This is truly an act of desperation. I thought he said in Los Angeles he was his own man. What happened in between? Sending all these surrogates, people we've worked with, progressive Democrats, that he never gave the time of day to in Washington for 8 years, as he and Clinton surrendered the Democratic Party to the grip of the Democratic Leadership Council, which spawned them and their corporate allies. He never gave them the back of his hand. Now he's desperately saying, Jesse Jackson, go out. Get those votes from Nader. Gloria Steinem, go out. Get those votes. John Conyers, go out. Paul Wellstone, Russ Feingold. You know what Ted Kennedy said the other day to someone in New York? He said, you know, if Gore wins the election because of what the Green Party has done, we progressive Democrats are going to have a lot more influence in our party. Well, there it is. You see how the equation starts turning? You see the leverage? You see the multiplier effect? 8 months because of people like you all over the country. We're going to have this watchdog party. It's going to be the fastest growing party in future elections. You wait and see how many thousands of people come into local, state, and national candidacies for the Green Party in the year 2002. We would like to see storefronts opening all over the country, Green Party storefronts, because the Green Party doesn't become a money-raising machine after the election. It rejoins the civic community, the citizen, neighborhood, community groups, environment, women's rights, civil rights, anti-poverty, community recommitment. That's what it's all. We have run an exemplary campaign. I'm really proud of everybody involved in it. Just think, we're for campaign finance reform, clean money, clean politics, right? We've refused to take PAC money, corrupt soft money, and corporate money, only individual money. In other words, we have unilaterally disarmed to set a moral example for those two corrupt parties who keep saying they're for campaign finance reform in between orgies of fundraising from these corrupt political corporate paymasters. And they keep saying, well, the Democrats say, we're not going to unilaterally disarm. Remember that handshake was between Gingrich and Clinton? Remember when they shook hands, was it in New Hampshire? Yeah. If they were going to have campaign finance reform, they must have had mercury in between their fingers. Huh? They don't unilaterally disarm. Listen, leadership means you take the first step. You set the example. That's the leadership. That's the exemplary way. And we have done it. And people are writing, and people are logging into our website. You can't believe how that website is rocking these days. It is pulsating. People want to volunteer. They want to add their talents, computer programs, graphic arts, ideas, etc. They're sending us contributions, $20, $10. We got one a few months ago from a retired widow on Social Security. And she said, I'm sending you $10 because I believe in what you're doing. You see, that's the real clean money, isn't it? That's the clean money from the country. Our website gives you all the details on the agenda that are too much to describe today. Our website, by the way, is votenader.com or votenader.org. But we have defined leadership as producing more leaders around the country, not more followers. We have defined a political movement as being one of thought, not of automatic belief. It's okay to have beliefs, but they're good when they're preceded by thought. And we have defined a political movement as one that must connect with the civic movement to be authentic, to be enduring, and to never forget where it comes from. The hearts, minds, and hands of the American people. That's the key thing. I want to say that John Rensenbrink, where's John? Just went out. He wrote this book, Against the Odds, you know, the book on the Green Party. Just wanted to tell him, John, we took on the odds in the year 2000.
Tell us about Winona.
Oh, I'm going to tell you about Winona. Unfortunately, Winona, who's campaigned a lot, and she has an 8-month-old son, and this little boy is going all over the country. I told her he's a frequent flyer champion of 8-month-old, excuse me, 8-month-old. She couldn't go to Washington because she's pretty tired now. I mean, she's traveled a lot, but you're going to hear a lot from her in the future. She, as you know, is a Harvard-trained economist, member of the Ojibwe tribe. She is a mother of 3, an author of books and articles, indigenous rights leader here and around the world, a working farmer, and she's only 40 years old. You can't do much more than that. This is why even Time magazine 6 years ago labeled her as one of America's 50 future leaders of this country. So this is the kind of, as a person who at Harvard Law School wrote his first major article on American Indians. I called it American Indians People Without a Future. I had gone to many reservations the prior summer. It's such a pleasure that my running mate was a First Native American. Doesn't that drum beat get to you? Sorry. Now, do you have a plan, each of you, to get your friends, relatives out, right? Co-workers, fellow students, right? We really expect a great turnout. By the way, there's nothing better than exceeding expectations in political pundit circles. I mean, our polls are running 5% nationwide, in some states 6, 7, 8%. Now, we couldn't get on the ballot in about 5 states, like North Carolina, Indiana, Oklahoma, etc. A lot of very technical obstacles, harassment, etc. We'll talk about later. But if we exceed expectations, then the impact of this movement is going to be even greater than we ever thought after Election Day. And you know, it all comes out to what Abraham Lincoln said so many years ago. I came across a little pamphlet a few months ago, and it was it was pre-president Abraham Lincoln, and it was a manual for political action in elections. And he said, when all is said and done, when all the debates are over, the only thing that really counts is getting out the vote in every precinct. This was in about 1850. And you know, it's the same as true today. It's getting out the vote. If you have somebody say, oh, I'm busy and I've got to go to a meeting and I don't have time, or I got to vote for Gore as the least of the work. You know, we have on our website, votenader.com, we put on 20 succinct reasons to vote for the Nader-LeDuc ticket. And you can use any one of those. Any one of those could persuade. And 5 of them can surely persuade. And 10 of them, it's a slam dunk when you add them up. So bring them down off the web and make some copies and get them out. If you're personally responsible for getting out the people who you know, who you've worked with, who you've lived with, who you've played with, relatives, friends, workers, get them out. We all have to have a sense of getting out our circle of people who we've worked and lived with for so long. I want to end on...
outside, too, if people want them. We have copies of them outside.
Oh, good. There are copies of the 20 reasons outside. There's each little one's after the other. This young man drafted them. Let's give him a hand. You know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said that when you go into the privacy of that voting booth, you are equal to every other voter in America. And when you go into that voting booth, he said, that's when you can vote your conscience. And that's when it's all about. Yeah. If we cannot vote our conscience, if we cannot vote for the ticket we believe in, we're going to vote for. The only wasted vote is the vote that you give to someone you don't believe in. That's right. They kept us out of the debates, but they can't keep you from voting for us. We campaigned on the issues and the subject matter and the horizons that matter to you. We campaigned so you could stand up with us for those horizons of justice and equity and peace. And we hope that you will vote your conscience, because if you don't vote your conscience, if you vote the lesser of two evils, you're eroding the moral basis of our democracy. And there's no end to the logic of the lesser of two evils. Let's have 3 rounds of that, and I'm going to end with an excerpt from Mahatma Gandhi, which I think will really resonate. Let's have 3 rounds of that beat. What a fantastic, this is primordial, isn't it? This is transcultural, isn't it? All right.
Just like this party.
All right.
We have Greens in Germany, we have Greens in New Zealand,
That's
we have
right.
Greens in Brazil, and the only way we're going to beat these multinational bastards is to organize on an international level ourselves.
And Green Party is emerging in Africa. In Africa now. And they came. 80 countries have Green parties. I'm glad you pointed out. 80 countries have Green parties. And a good many of them had delegations to the Green Party convention in Denver in June. It was very nice to see that kind of solidarity. Here is Mahatma Gandhi. He said, there are 7 blunders of the world that lead to violence and injustice. 7. I'm going to read them to you. 1, wealth without work. 2, pleasure without conscience. 3, knowledge without character. 4, commerce without morality. 5, science without humanity. 6, worship without sacrifice. And 7, politics without principles. Thank you.